A grandchild who talks about wanting to be a painter is simply ridiculous. We don't have such a grandchild. Who would attend the funeral of a grandchild who didn't meet our expectations? One day, my 13-year-old son Tom, who aspired to be an artist, suddenly passed away in a traffic accident. While arranging his funeral, engulfed in deep sorrow, I informed my in-laws. Their attitude made me so angry that my hands trembled. Realizing it was futile to say anything more, I simply said, "That's enough," and hung up the phone. A few days later, during Tom's funeral, my mother-in-law called again, stunning me with her words. "We have important guests coming over. Come help right away." Her usual selfish demand left me aghast. I refused, saying it was impossible because of my son's funeral, but she dismissively insisted in a high-handed manner. "A child's funeral like that doesn't matter. You've always refused my requests, so help out today for once." Enraged by her irrational demands, I accepted and went to my in-laws' house, holding my son's portrait still in my mourning clothes after the funeral ended. I decided to cut ties with them that day. I couldn't bear any more of their behavior. Arriving at their house, what awaited me was an unexpected outcome. My name is Susie. I'm a 43-year-old homemaker. I met my husband through a friend's introduction, and we lived happily with our son Tom. In fact, a certain incident a while back made us distance ourselves from them. I still get angry thinking about it. Our relationship with my in-laws was never great from the beginning. Every time there was a gathering at their house, they would summon me to help with various tasks. "How many times do I have to tell you to come immediately when called?" "Well, never mind. Take these dishes to everyone, and we're running low on drinks, so go buy some." And then their high-handed orders and their attitude as if it was the most natural thing made me dislike them, honestly. Throughout this, my husband always stood up for me. "Mom, stop making Susie do everything. She's not a servant, you know." It was difficult for me to confront my in-laws directly, so having my husband express my concerns was a great relief. With his support, I tried not to worry too much about our strained relationship or their overbearing behavior. And importantly, they were always kind to my son. When Tom was born, they celebrated extravagantly, always making grand gestures for milestones and celebrations, treating him as if he was the apple of their eye. Because they were good to Tom, I felt obliged to help out occasionally, despite my own feelings towards them. Not doing so every time. The turning point came when Tom graduated from elementary school. My son Tom, who loved drawing, began expressing his desire to become a painter when he was in the upper grades of elementary school. Even subtracting a parent's bias, his drawings were exceptionally good, evidenced by his numerous selections in art competitions. More than his talent, it was apparent that he was happiest and most alive when drawing. Despite the challenging and harsh path of a painter's life, my husband and I supported Tom's dream. However, my in-laws felt differently. During a celebration for Tom's elementary school graduation, the moment he spoke of his dream to become a painter, my in-laws' faces soured. "A painter? Don't choose a career that won't earn you money. That's nothing to be proud of. Tom should become a lawyer or a doctor. Those professions offer security and high social status." Their previously kind and pleasant demeanor turned into one of anger and imposition. Their reaction left Tom wide-eyed and frozen. Furthermore, they directed their anger towards my husband and me. "What kind of education have you been giving him? How can Tom say he wants to be a painter?" "Exactly. Tom is the heir of our family. He must pursue a respectable profession, or it's a disgrace." I felt like I had been hit on the head. Their kindness towards Tom was only because he was a boy and the heir. They intended to use him for their own pride. Realizing this, I felt intense anger. My husband standing next to me seemed just as furious. Tom was scared by the sudden outburst from his usually kind grandparents. We hugged him and glared at my in-laws. "Please don't use Tom for your bragging rights. His life is for him to decide, not you." My in-laws' faces were red with anger and they were shouting something, but we ignored them and left their house. Since then, my in-laws stopped showing affection towards Tom. The only communication we received from them was when they demanded our help for family gatherings at their house. Each time my husband angrily refused, allowing our family to live peacefully. In middle school, Tom joined the art club and started practicing drawing seriously. He happily shared his daily learnings and creations with us. My husband and I watched him with fondness as he spoke about his day. But this peaceful life didn't last long. One evening, as I was preparing dinner and thinking Tom would be home soon, the phone rang. Hello? What? Tom was in a traffic accident. The call was from a local hospital, informing me that Tom had been involved in an accident on his way home from school and was taken to the hospital. I hurriedly contacted my husband at work and we both rushed to the hospital. We met at the entrance and were guided to Tom's room, but I was speechless at the sight of my battered son. Barely opening his eyes, he looked at us as my husband desperately spoke to him. I also held Tom's hand, speaking to him with all my might, but tragically he quietly passed away. The premature loss of Tom made everything go dark before my eyes, and I collapsed on the spot. My husband, who embraced me, was pale and had a vacant look in his eyes. Amidst our grief, there were many things to arrange for the funeral, but during the hospital staff's explanation, my husband collapsed due to the overwhelming shock and was admitted to the hospital. I had to stay strong at least until the funeral. I felt like collapsing myself, but I resolved to be strong and composed. After setting the funeral date with the funeral home, I contacted family and the school. Everyone expressed their sadness and wished to attend the funeral. I was hesitant about contacting my in-laws. Even though we are estranged, they are still family. Should I contact them? But fearing repercussions, I called them after a long time. "Oh, what a rare call from you," my mother-in-law said snidely. I held back my retort and informed her of Tom's death and the funeral date. Her response was shocking. "What? I don't have a grandson like that." "Excuse me?" I was speechless at her words. Then I heard my father-in-law's voice, likely on speakerphone. Both of them were speaking in a tone that seemed mockingly cheerful. "A grandson who wants to be a painter. We don't have one, do we? Right, so he died? Well, who would attend a funeral for a grandson who didn't meet our expectations? Just handle it yourselves." Their words shook me with anger. How could they speak like that about a grandson who didn't conform to their expectations? My husband and I were heartbroken, and he had even collapsed from shock. Yet they seemed indifferent, even taking delight in my husband's hospitalization. They said it was a punishment for being a disobedient son. Listening to my in-laws, I was on the verge of exploding with rage, but I took a deep breath and calmed myself down. Realizing that arguing with them was futile, I simply said fine and hung up. A few days later, we held Tom's funeral as planned. Many people came to bid farewell to Tom, and their presence warmed my heart amidst the unbearable sorrow. I was determined to focus on saying a final goodbye to my son, which was also for my husband, who was unable to attend the funeral. I was trying to keep my composure as the ceremony was nearing its end, and attendees were placing flowers on the casket. Then, my phone vibrated at that moment. I hadn't turned it off, expecting several messages, and when I looked, I saw my mother-in-law's name on the display. I discreetly moved to a corner of the room and answered the call. "Mother-in-law, is it urgent?" I whispered. To this, my mother-in-law responded in her usual domineering tone. "A funeral? Oh, is that today? Well, that's irrelevant. I have important guests coming over shortly, so come and help out." I was stunned by her selfishness, as usual. What did she just say? "No, I'm at my son's funeral right now." "Enough talk. Come right now." You've always turned down my requests, so help out for once today. The guests arriving today require special attention. Despite my hopes for a misunderstanding, my mother-in-law was insistent, paying no heed to my situation. Drained of energy and time to argue, I decided this would be my last encounter with my in-laws, and told her I'd come after the funeral. After managing to get through the burial and saying goodbye to the attendees, I headed to my in-laws' house in my mourning clothes, holding my son's portrait. When I rang the doorbell, my mother-in-law appeared, looked at me, and scolded. "You came dressed like that. How insensitive. Well, never mind, the guests are here, so get to work." Ignoring my son's portrait, she turned away. Seeing her attitude, I realized she only saw me and my son as conveniences, and headed to the living room, determined. "Come to the kitchen, not the living room. You can't be seen by the guests like that." Despite her calls, I opened the living room door. The guests, friends of my in-laws, were surprised by my sudden entrance and stared at me, dressed in mourning clothes, holding the portrait. After a brief silence, one guest gazing at the portrait asked, "Tom, is that you?" Shocked to hear my son's name, I turned towards the voice and was further surprised. "Could you be Mr. Smith?" The man was a kind neighbor who had taught my son painting years ago and who my son adored. He had always been kind, answering my son's questions and indulging in his painting sessions. He had praised my son's talent, believing he'd become a great painter. Sadly, he had moved away last year and my son had missed him, but he had kept painting, believing in their future reunion. I had wanted to inform this neighbor of my son's passing, but lacked the means. Meeting him here was unexpected. As I was processing my thoughts, the other guests asked him, "Mr. Smith, do you know her?" Wondering if he was someone important. I was about to ask when my mother-in-law interrupted. "Susie, I told you to come to the kitchen. This man is a very famous painter. It might be hard for someone as rude as you, but please be careful not to offend him." Only then did I realize that this neighbor, who was friendly with my son, was a painter. Neither my husband nor I knew much about painting, so we hadn't realized his significance. So that was the case. "I apologize for not realizing you were professionally mentoring him," I said, shaking hands with him even though it felt a bit late. But instead of focusing on that, he asked with a trembling voice, "Tom has passed away." His face was filled with sorrow. I nodded in response. "My son died in a car accident a few days ago. Today was his funeral, but my in-laws, who never accepted his dream of becoming a painter, didn't attend. Instead, they called me during the funeral, demanding I come help out immediately. That's why I am here today, to cut ties with them along with my son." As I spoke deliberately and calmly, everyone present except my in-laws looked at them in disbelief. My in-laws, on the other hand, were flustered, contorting their faces and unnerved by the cold stares from their friends. "What are you talking about, Susie?" "We had no idea today was Tom's funeral. We would never do such a thing," my father-in-law stammered in a panic. Amidst his excuses, the painter stood up and said, "Enough." He then stared coldly at my in-laws and said dismissively, "Excuse me, but I must leave." The in-laws and their friends tried to stop him from leaving, but he shrugged off their hands. "It's clear who is lying between you and Tom's mother. I am disappointed in you. Please do not involve me in your affairs anymore." His words left the room frozen. Seizing the moment, I turned to my in-laws and said firmly, "As of today, I'm severing ties with you. Please do not contact me or my husband ever again." After glaring at my stunned in-laws, I left their house. A few days later, my husband's health improved and we returned to our home. We prayed in front of Tom's portrait, mourning him together since my husband couldn't attend the funeral. Then the doorbell rang. It was Mr. Smith, our former neighbor and the painter. He asked to share the memory of our son with us, and we gladly welcomed him. He prayed too, silently shedding tears. There are many who mourned our son. The fact brought us a bit of solace. After a while, we shared memories of our son. After reminiscing, I asked something that had been on my mind. "Mr. Smith, why were you at my in-laws' house that day? It didn't seem like you were close to them." "It seemed like he was close with them, so I wondered about the connection." He answered with a bitter expression. Apparently he was acquainted with a friend of my in-laws. They had invited him, but during his visit, my in-laws, despite meeting him for the first time, were arrogant and even smugly requested a special painting for themselves. Mr. Smith was displeased with the condescending attitude of my in-laws and was about to leave when I arrived. If I hadn't been invited by a friend, I might still be unaware of Tom's passing. "I'm truly glad I could meet you again," he said thoughtfully, and then continued, "Tom was truly talented, a wonderful kid. It's such a shame that we have to say goodbye so soon." He said this as if savoring the words, looking at my son's paintings displayed in our home. Then he made a suggestion. "If you like, would you consider holding an exhibition in memory of Tom? His works are too good to be kept hidden. They deserve to be seen by many." This proposal was a surprise for my husband and me, who were grieving our son's loss. At first we were taken aback, but remembering Tom's wish to have his paintings seen by many, we decided to go ahead with the exhibition. With Mr. Smith's help, we organized a memorial exhibition at the local community center. From the first day, many people came to see Tom's paintings, filling my husband and me with emotion. His classmates, neighbors, and even people who never met Tom, like Mr. Smith's friends, all came. Sharing memories of Tom with those who knew him lightened my heart a bit. But then my in-laws showed up. "Aren't these paintings great? My grandson painted them. He would be so proud to see this exhibition. Up there in heaven," they bragged to the visitors. Despite previously mocking Tom's dream of becoming a painter, they were now boasting about him. My anger rose as I was about to retort when my husband shouted, "Don't you dare talk about Tom like that. You, who denied and belittled his dream and didn't even attend his funeral." Furious, my husband publicly exposed all the wrongs my in-laws had done. The visitors were initially shocked by his outburst, but their expressions changed as they heard the story. When my husband finished, everyone looked at my in-laws with contempt. Mr. Smith then delivered the final blow. "You have no right to be here at this exhibition. Please leave now." Surrounded by scornful eyes, my in-laws were indignant. "That's a lie. We always cared about our grandson and supported his dream to be a painter." They continued to lie even then. Frustrated, I pointed to a painting that was pieced together with tape. "See this? See this painting? It's taped together because when Tom told his grandparents about his dream to be a painter, they tore it up, calling it foolish. But this was the painting that first got him selected in a competition. When they destroyed his dream and his most treasured painting, he cried as he pieced it back together." Hearing this story, the visitors began murmuring, condemning my in-laws. "That's going too far. Why didn't they support his dream? How could they show their faces here after doing something so terrible?" Unable to bear the condemning stares and words, my in-laws twisted their faces in frustration and, clenching their teeth, fled the scene like they were escaping. Despite the trouble with my in-laws, the memorial exhibition for Tom was successfully concluded. The pain of losing our son hasn't faded, but my husband and I are coping by sharing memories of him. One day, while in this mindset, I received a call from a payphone. Curious, I answered and was shocked to find it was my father-in-law on the line. As I was at a loss for words, he rapidly explained his situation. Apparently, my mother-in-law had fallen and broken her leg, requiring hospitalization. While hospital care was manageable, she would need home care after discharge. He said it was hard for him alone to take care of her even now, and demanded that I start helping at the hospital immediately. Disgusted by his audacity, I sighed. "I don't have a mother-in-law. Are you sure you're calling the right person?" With no intention of further involvement, I said just that and hung up, ignoring my father-in-law's protests on the other end. Later, I heard that my in-laws were ostracized by their friends for angering the painter and losing face. Furthermore, the neighbors who attended the exhibition spread the word about their treatment of us, leading to them being shunned by everyone around. Even after my mother-in-law returned home from the hospital, nobody seemed concerned or willing to help, leaving them completely isolated. Additionally, the neighbors kept watch to ensure my in-laws didn't approach us. Thanks to that, we lived without any contact with them but still received updates. Apparently, my father-in-law had been managing her care alone, but eventually hurt his back. Unable to care for her by himself, they both ended up in a nursing home. Due to their age, my father-in-law's back condition didn't improve, and my mother-in-law, who disliked rehabilitation, weakened further and became unable to walk. With no visitors, they were reportedly living in loneliness. Perhaps unable to bear the solitude, or finally regretting their actions, they began calling my husband frequently after moving to the nursing home. However, my husband also wanted nothing more to do with them and ignored all the calls. Over a year has passed since we lost our son and we still haven't overcome our grief. Nevertheless, we're trying to live positively, cherishing our son's paintings, and reminiscing about him together. Of all the challenges we have faced, dealing with my in-laws has been the most difficult. Out of all his paintings, we hold a special place in our hearts for the one that depicts our family of 3. It is prominently displayed in our living room, and I make sure to pay my respects to it every morning.